Like a Todd Boehly contract, we just keep on rolling, and we've still got about 6 years left. Welcome to season 5 of the Anglo-Italian pod. As always, my name is Rory, and I'm joined by my very good friend Adam Gipke. Adam, how we doing, man?
Yeah, really good, thank you. I think we've just about recovered from the hangover of the Euros, and we had a great summer, didn't we? We actually bumped into each other in Lecce, didn't we?
We did for the first time. We actually physically met each other. It's really weird, this internet thing, right? How we've
Yeah,
obviously we've grown pretty fond of each other over the last couple of years and got quite
exactly.
close out over working with each other. But actually seeing each other in person was great. I got to meet the family. It was delightful. It was an incredibly
Yeah,
hot day in Lecce, but there was
it
good
was.
ice cream, which helped, right?
It definitely did. It definitely made us a bit more cooler on that particular day. 39 degrees for anyone that's interested. But Rory, we've got a fascinating season to kind of preview and predict. I'm sure our predictions are going to be wildly out there, as they always are.
As always.
But yeah, how do you think this season is going to pan out? Because it's fascinating. We haven't got the transfer window yet shut,
Mhm.
and there's probably a lot of learnings from last season, right?
Yeah, I feel like last year was a bit of a watershed season in terms of like, the points deductions and the real implementation of PSR and like
Mm,
a lot of clubs waking up to like um consequences apart from Chelsea, right? So I think this year we might see things a little bit calmer, but I am kind of expecting like the most competitive Premier League season ever. I
mm.
think last year when the promoted teams came up, it kind of looked like they were all just going to go straight back down. With the teams that are coming up this year, I feel like we could see the gap a little bit closer, and especially with teams like Forest, Brentford that struggled so
Mm,
much last year, I think even at the bottom as well as the top
yeah.
potentially is going to be much more competitive. So I'm expecting it to be a lot more tight knit than it was
Mm,
last year. I feel like there was big gaps across the table, right?
massively. I think PSR is the thing these days. It feels like
Mhm.
this is the thing that clubs are trying to juggle around with. And you can kind of sit in a transfer business because I don't think we've been used to as a quiet window as we've experienced so far. And I think that's the repercussions of the spending from the last few years, and it's starting to kind of come to fruition. Clubs are having to be smart, savvy, and when I say savvy, obviously the likes of Aston Villa and Everton did some deliberate transfers, shall we say? Don't know
Yeah.
how legitimate those transfers were. But yeah, I can definitely feel that sentiment of I think it's down to who's going to be the best in terms of enabling the best transfer for their clubs. You can see Spurs are benefiting from their astute kind of manner with Daniel Levy. I question the likes of Man United personally, and I'm sure we'll go into greater discussion
Always,
later on.
always. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but also, I think from a playing perspective, Rory, I feel like last season we saw a lot of stoppage time. I don't
Mm.
know whether that's going to become a thing as much as we saw, because we saw a lot of last minute winners, for example, last minute goals in particular. But I feel maybe this season, with the impact of so many games, potentially there might be some better man management or time
Mm.
management. And particularly, I think you can see that by the way some of the clubs have gone about their business. They have kind of looked at the defensive aspect. They've tried to make sure that they've got bodies this time. It feels
Mm.
like clubs have got better depth. Maybe some, maybe not in all cases.
Yeah.
But certainly, if you're looking at Chelsea, you
They've
could
got
have at
plenty of
least four
depth. They've
squads,
got
couldn't you?
plenty of depth. Yeah, yeah. I don't think they'll be struggling for numbers. But I think it's really interesting because what will be interesting to see is if the Premier League actually follow through with this. Because I feel like when at the beginning of the season there was like 9 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, whatever. By the end of the season, it had just gone back to normal again, and it feels like now there was the announcement today that there's going to be a crackdown on attacking players during corners, which is terrible
Mm.
news for me as an Arsenal fan, I'll be
Yeah, I
honest.
saw that. Yeah.
But it feels like this is going to be like the new pet project of the Premier League, and maybe that will be the thing they focus on. Added time will go back to what it always was, and then this
Mm.
pet project will get abandoned by Christmas again. If you know what I mean. So I think it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see if they continue to implement these things, because I think the additional extra time did actually make a difference in terms of time wasting. I think it did stop teams from
Yeah.
just like lying on the floor so much or like being so cynical. So I think it did have a good impact. It's just whether they're actually going to follow through with it, which, with Pugmall and the Premier League, we know what to expect, really, don't we?
We do, but we have to kind of give it its due. VAR is being refined again. We're going to see the introduction of the offsides from the rest of Europe come into play. So that's going to be interesting to see how that might help teams, especially those that are going into Champions League, because they'll get maybe more adapted to the format and know how to react and how to deal with those situations. I'm hoping we get a bit more clarity going forward about how they're going to manage those kind of decision-making aspects as well, because we've heard that VAR, you're going to have to refer to Twitter to see what the decision has been made during games, which is going to be fascinating, isn't it?
What we need now is more reasons to go on Twitter. That's what we need. More reasons to go on Twitter.
Elon Musk is rubbing his hands.
Exactly. Well, I'm just looking forward to Ten Hag desperately pulling a computer apart when he disagrees with the offside decision for the millionth time. That's what I'm looking forward to. But elsewhere, we were looking at a trend for me, I think, is teams in the Champions League, as you said, with all this added time. Do you think we see so many teams like Villa, for example, they're coming up into like the Champions League this year? Will teams be able to sustain those positions, or will we continue to see the trend of once you get into Europe, once you get into the big competitions in Europe, they'll start to drop down again? Because I feel like teams like Newcastle and Brighton now might be able to actually take advantage of this a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating because obviously we've got the new Champions League format as well play a part. But I look at Villa's business and I've had to reflect on my kind of preview and prediction of how they're going to perform. And I feel like they are in a good position going forward into this competition, because actually when you reflect on the Champions League format, they don't have to win every game. They can only, if they win a certain amount of games, they can still progress to the next stage. So essentially, you've got someone in Unai Emery who's going to be very clever. He's going to know what he's got to do in terms of setting out his team. But you can sense that also with the signings that he's already brought through the door, Rory. I get the sense that he's been very clever. He knew what type of players. There's still a lot of speculation on certain individuals potentially moving on. The likes of Diego Carlos, I think, is being linked with Fulham still at the moment. So it'd be interesting to see how those kind of little transfers pan out. But I think Villa have been very clever. I think my main concern for Villa is the likes of Ollie Watkins, for example. If he does get injured, who's going to take that burden of goals potentially and maybe help them out? Morgan Rogers, we know, had a good introduction last season. Looking forward to see what he can deliver for Villa in particular. But it's an exciting team, despite obviously having to get rid of the likes of Douglas Luiz, for example, to kind of balance books.
This is something that's interesting for me. The arrival of Amadou Onana. The arrival of Amadou Onana. I think it'll be really interesting to see if he can actually fulfill that role of Douglas Luiz. They're obviously quite similar players. I feel like Onana can do that role. But if you listen to Everton fans, they often say, when he fancies it. If he can do if he's ever done it consistently is the question mark. So I think that's a really interesting point there for Villa and their squad. But Adam, I can't believe we've got this far without talking about Chelsea. This is the most interesting thing for me ahead of this season is Chelsea Football Club. And I saw a tweet that was it was from an American journalist, can't remember the name, but he just said, you have to remember these guys are baseball guys and they're playing it like it's baseball, right? Now, one of my favorite films of all time is Moneyball. If you've not seen it, you have to watch it. It's an incredible film, right? But what I'm branding Chelsea is waste of Moneyball, right? I feel like what they're doing is they're approaching it like a baseball team, right? So if you're not familiar, in the MLB, you have Major League Baseball, and then you have the farmer leagues, right? And not like the Romanian Premier League, but you have farm leagues where you can send teams out, or you can send players out and that play for these local teams, kind of semi-professional. They're on very small money, but you can drop and pick them up whenever you like. And you can you choose and send them where you like, right? So if you've seen the film Moneyball, there's a really brutal scene where Jonah Hill has to do one of the trades. And he just sits down with one of the players and he goes, you've been traded to Detroit, pack your bags, your contract signed, see you later. And just walks out. And even watching that scene, holy crap, that is like, and the player just goes, okay, kind of cool deal, right, done. I feel like what we're seeing with this Gallagher transfer as well is really seeing that attitude, and they're realizing that in football that's not really how it works, right? You can't just decide when a team does or doesn't take your player, right? You can't one day say, oh yeah, we'll send him there, oh no, actually no, now we need him. Right? And also on a human level, I don't think you can really treat people like that. Like, fans get upset when they see players treated like that, especially a player who, like, you know, loves the club, come through the youth system, proper Chelsea and all that. And I think it's really highlighting their attitude.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to see how this ends. But I think this season you have to register a 25-man squad, right? And they have to. So we're going to do a quick game, Adam. I'm going to spring this on you, right? Okay. So I have the name of all the registered players for Chelsea this season, right? I'm just going to ask you how many they have, right? So how many goalkeepers do you think they have in their squad?
So I have heard this one, so I'm hoping I'm correct in this assumption. 8.
They have 7 goalkeepers, but 1 is out on loan.
Okay,
so that's 6.
Not that far
6
off.
first-team goalkeepers. Not bad. 6 first-team goalkeepers. Let's go for defenders.
I would say, hazard a guess, 15.
Nailed it. 15. 3 out on loan. Right. Midfielders.
Oh, this is where they've jumped up, haven't they? I'm going to say 25.
They've got 15. 15 midfielders, apparently. So it's evenly spread so far, kind of. And then let's go finally. Forwards, this includes wingers, right?
Well, they've only got 2, surely. No, I'm joking. I think they've got 8.
16 forwards.
What?
That includes wingers and strikers, right? 16 forwards.
Insane.
None of whom are on loan. This, for me, is the most fascinating thing about the Premier League this year.
Yeah.
How this is managed. Because Maresca is coming from a good season with Leicester, but the Leicester fans weren't massively in love with him. They nearly bottled the league, right? They got pretty close to throwing it away. Yeah. The fans were getting tired of him. It's a very unique, specific brand of football. It's your first big job. It's an absolute basket case, and you're going to have to try and keep all these players happy. I just don't. It's going to be the story that we're talking about constantly this season. In the past, it's been Manchester United. I think this is the year of Chelsea and the gossip that's going to happen this year. Like, how do you see it going?
Yeah, I think he's going to have to ruffle some feathers if he's going to get this Chelsea squad to perform. Obviously, they've got Europe, which I think their fan base at least are slightly happy about, and it will obviously improve their chances of like potential money gained from sponsorship, etc. However, this is going to be fascinating because, as you say, Enzo Maresca had a fairly steady season with Leicester. You know, got them up inevitably, but as you allude to, didn't necessarily warm the Leicester City fan base. And I think when they look at it in reflection, I think they will say and allude to the fact that Enzo Maresca was persistent with his style of football. You know, he wanted to play a stylistic style of football, which I think will be interesting to see the contrast when they've got Steve Cooper at the helm. But talking about Chelsea, it is going to be a difficult one because you're coming off someone like Pochettino that I feel sorry for now in the grand scheme of things, but he had to grapple with what sounds like a hell of a lot of backroom politics. And I think Enzo Maresca is going to have to do one or the other thing, isn't he? He's going to have to either be the coach that doesn't get involved with the politics, or he's going to have to be the man that makes himself as part of that team and, like I say, ruffle some feathers. I think he's going to have to lay the line down quite firmly. I think if you look at some of the clips that you've seen from pre-season friendly, I think he's got a lot of work on his hands. You know, defensively, they look shoddy. They look lost at times, especially in the USA when they played certain friendlies. Badacelli, he's a guy that came in with a lot of hype, a bit raw, but there was clips of him doing the rounds on Twitter where he barely even tracked back his markers, you know, and this isn't against prime strikers in Europe. This is, you know, maybe amateur at best. It's worrying. It is very
Yeah.
worrying. And then you've got the balance of midfield, which has never been great. You've got the Enzo Fernandez incident from the
Issue.
Copa America to
Yeah.
deal with. And then you've got the fact that really, I suppose, no one really fancies Nicholas Jackson up for top. So there is that question. I know there's ongoing talks about Lukaku maybe being involved in a swap deal with Osimhen. Now, I think that'd be actually a great move for both parties in the sense that, you know, Chelsea gets an established striker who is capable. He's capable of maybe pushing them up the league. The question mark for me is actually, can they do the deal? Because I think there's a lot of stumbling blocks, including Lukaku's wages. But yeah, Enzo Maresca, I'm not unsure about. I've got a separate question, I suppose, to pose to you, which is related to the Chelsea-Man United debate in terms of who do we think is going to get sacked out of the two managers from the respective clubs? Because I think both of these managers have a potential where they could go on a good run and progress. But if it doesn't go to plan, as we anticipate with both managers, they could easily be out of the door by November. And I don't necessarily think them two will be the first candidates to go out the door. I think actually it's more likely to be Nuno Espirito Santo at Forest. I think he could be struggling. However, I do feel with Enzo Maresca, he was in a fairly steady job role in Leicester. I know he had to contend with potentially some PSR stuff if Leicester were in a position where he was at the helm. But look, it's going to be a fascinating kind of circumstance, isn't it, from my point of view? And I think the only way that he's going to do it is by ensuring that he establishes a core group that he trusts in. I think the likes of Dewsbury Hall is likely to be that candidate, and Cole Palmer, for example. But he's got to build a squad. Ultimately, he's got to build a squad that the fans can get behind. And I just don't see it. I still think there's a lot of gaps in that Chelsea team.
Yeah, it just even though we've just listed like 40 odd players, none of them really, there's still like no clear striker. There's still no real proper holding midfielder. There's still no really good goalkeeper who's going to get you to different levels. There's no properly good centre back. It just, it still feels, despite the massive numbers, huge holes, which is impressive really in terms of how badly you can build a squad. But we're going to take a very quick break and we're going to come back and talk a bit more specifically about the Premier League. We'll be looking at the top, the middle, and the bottom. So we'll see you after this very quick break. See you on the other side.
So, Rory, top two from last season were Man City and Arsenal. And obviously, it's an interesting summer for both clubs. I look at the business that Arteta has done so far. Very clever and astute with Calafiori through the door. I don't know if that necessarily addresses the kind of concerns that you might have as a fan of Arsenal, but for me, it does feel that they are kind of hindered by that PSR. They are waiting for certain members of the team to be maybe sold on before they can bring in certain established players. I know there's been rumors about Marco Moreno, and that's going to be a fascinating signature if they do get that over the line. But at the same time, we've got Man City. Obviously, it seems a bit of an underwhelming window. We're going into potentially the final season of Pep, and we've got obviously the lingering kind of case at the moment. But if we stick to the footballing side of things, obviously Oscar Bob has got a fractured leg fracture, and Julian Alvarez did make that move to Atletico Madrid, which it's an interesting one. I feel on the grand scheme of things, that was a good bit of business in terms of what they managed to achieve. However, it's going to be very difficult to get someone of his caliber through the doors. And I think their hands have been forced. I also feel, I don't know about what your feelings are about Man City, but I feel they're very light in that middle of the pitch, especially with Rodri and a reliance on Rodri. If he doesn't perform, or for any example, he is injured, the backups aren't great. I mean, it's been announced this evening about Calvin Phillips maybe joining on loan to Ipswich even. So this is going to be fascinating to see how Man City approach this season and reliance on their players. Obviously, there's rumours about John McAtee as well, potentially being someone that comes through. But Yeah, I've got high hopes for Arsenal. I feel like, Arsenal have done some really creative bit of business. I don't think it's the end. I think we'll see at least at a minimum of two more
Yeah.
signings. That's my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
If we kind of split it up, let's start off with Man City. How do you think they're going to go about this defense of their title? And do you think they've got enough members in that squad?
No, I always think Man City have got the strength to get over the line, right? Regardless, they've always
Mm,
got the strength, the mentality, the coach, the experience. They've got everything. But I think the key thing with this City team at the moment is experience, because it's actually a team that's getting pretty old. There's a lot of
mm,
players there that they're definitely past the top of the hill, right? I think players like De Bruyne came very close to going to Saudi this year. Ederson came
mm.
very close to going
Yeah.
Saudi this year. You got members of that defense that are starting to look a little bit creaky. I think the Alvarez one's really interesting because obviously he came up with some massive goals and massive moments for City last
Mm,
year, and he was one of those players that was like a fringe player for City. But if you had him in fantasy, he scored every time he played. Just the impact the guy had was insane, and I know that the City fans I do know and City fans I've seen on Twitter have been gutted that he's gone. They're like, we can't believe we
mm.
sold him. Like
Yeah.
he was huge. But obviously when 85 million comes through the door and the opportunity, you'd be like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Let's see. Like let's take advantage of this opportunity. Now what I think is that they have to go out and replace him. But Man City at the moment, I think, and it's coming across in Pep's press conferences for me, is that they're on a PR thing of we don't spend money. They're kind of on
Mhm.
this, look how much
Yeah.
United have spent, look how much Arsenal have spent, look how much Liverpool
Yeah.
have spent. We don't spend that much money. So initially I was like, oh, they're going to go out and drop 90 million on some player and then be like, oh, we've replaced him. But I think actually we might see them not replace Alvarez and that guy who came from Girona, Savino, I want to say his name is.
Savio. Yeah. Savio.
Savio, sorry, yeah. He looks like an exciting player. I think we're going to see him
Mm,
come into the squad pretty much immediately and into the team, which
yeah.
is unlike Pep. Usually, they take a year and then they get brought in. I think we're going
Yeah.
to see him come in almost immediately. And I think we might see some of the young players come through because it feels like City are trying to do a bit of repair before this court case. Of like, well, no, look, because the last 3 years we've brought through more young players than any of the other top 6 teams, or we've
Sure.
spent, and that's fine. Like, if it's a change of modus operandi and you've seen the error of your ways and you're gonna, become more honest or whatever, fine. But the cynical part of me is like, you're only doing this because you think you've been caught, right? So I
Yeah.
think it'll be interesting to see what their attitude is in the market. I don't expect them to really spend a lot of money, as I say, because I think they're on this PR thing. But yeah, what concerns me, it concerns me as much as I kind of half hope it happens, is that if Rodri is out,
Yeah.
we did see the bad patch they had last year was when he
Yeah.
was out, right? Kevin De Bruyne wasn't as productive last year, was injured for large parts of it, wasn't as impactful. It'll be interesting to see what role Foden plays because it kind of felt like Foden was going to be molded into the next De Bruyne and, like kind of take over that crown. So I think there are gaps in that squad. And unfortunately, from an Arsenal point of view, we don't particularly respond well to pressure. And I feel like this year, people expect us to win it. I think people are like, okay, this is Arsenal's year. They have to do it this year. And that's what terrifies me the most. Because I think with Pep, if this is to be his last year, he's not going to want to go out on a title lost,
Sure.
right? Like Ferguson,
Yeah.
he waited until he won it again before he left,
Yeah.
right? So I think Pep, with this being his last year, he'll just pull some of that voodoo magic and get them over the line. But this is, for me, from an Arsenal point of view, the year to take advantage of them because I think they're in more of a transition than they've been since Pep took over.
And looking at Calafiori, we know about his credentials from Bologna. We know what kind of player to be expected already. Do you think he solidifies that kind of left-hand side? And to what ends does that kind of maybe change the approach for this season? Because it feels like maybe he's thought of this being, we're going to shut up shop. We've got maybe like for like in terms of the Man City style of, we've got really tall, back line that can maybe be agile to different scenarios now. Because you've got in the likes of Calafiori and Ben White, if that's the chosen wing backs, players that can play centrally. But then as a backup, we've got Zinchenko, you've got Kivo, You got Urian Timber still to come back into this as well.
Zinchenko.
So it feels like this is already a fascinating kind of dilemma for Arteta, because he might play around with it, and we know how he likes to play around with things. In particular, pickpockets being introduced to the club's kind of meetings and stuff like that. Which I thought to myself, Roy, I don't know when you heard this story,
I felt embarrassed.
I thought, surely they would have known that there's these random people around the team. Like, what are they doing, looking at my bag or something like that, right?
I don't know. I feel like, honestly, we've said it before, but like Arteta, I love the man, but I would hate to go out for a drink with him. I think he's like massively high performance. He's completely high performance, right? He loves Jake Humphries. He loves that podcast. He's all over Diary of a CEO or whatever it's called. Like, he's very much that type of person, right? So I think, but it just made me, it's one of those stories that, like, when you win, everyone goes, that's what makes a difference. And when you lose, like when he played the Anfield music at the Arsenal training ground, everybody laughs, right? It's just massively results dependent, this thing. But as most things of Arsenal, what I enjoyed the most about it was every other fan base losing their shit about it. I mean, like, guys, don't worry. It's got nothing to do with you. You can go back to your business, right? But I did enjoy that story because it was very, very Arteta, just so Arteta. But if we go to the Calafiori signing, I think it's really interesting. Clive, PAFC, I want to say, he does the Arsenal Vision podcast. Easily one of the best voices at the moment on Arsenal Football Club. He was on the fan debate, which I kind of tend to avoid, but I watched his clips and he was talking about the Calafiori signing. And he kind of summed it up really well. So I'm going to kind of steal his thunder.
Fine.
But like, I think last year, everybody knew that if you lock down the right wing of Arsenal, you basically stopped our attacks, right? Saka and White on the overlap was definitely the more dangerous side. The Zinchenko left back, and at times Tomiyasu left back, or with Trossard or Martinelli, depending on who was fit. There just wasn't that same overlap. There wasn't that same relationship. There wasn't that same solidity when we were caught on the break as well. So I think this Calafiori signing, I don't think it was planned. I think it was kind of an opportunity in the market signing. I think they saw that he was leaving, that he was interested, and they went, okay, well, if we don't get him now, we're never getting him. So I think, but I'm really encouraged by it. I think we're building the tallest team known to man. It's just everybody is so fucking tall. They're all over 6 foot. So the back line, we've made what was the best defense in the Premier League arguably stronger. So I think it's a really, really exciting signing. But obviously there are holes that need to be filled. This Mikel Merino signing, hopefully it gets over the line. It looks like for some reason it's not PSR. It's not like squad size. It's like Arteta's decision that we're not signing anyone until someone's out of the door. I think it's kind of to put pressure on the board above him and be like, you need to sell these players. Like, we need to get players out of the door. But apparently Marino is happy to wait. He only wants Arsenal. He knows the signing's coming. We just need to wait for a few, Nketiah, Nelson, etc., Ramsdale, to get out of the door so that we can bring him in. But it looks like, touch wood, that one's done. And then the next focus is it going to be a striker? Is it going to be a winger? Arteta has said this pre-season that, like, I'm watching him pre-season, Gabriel Jesus has looked like a different player, completely, like, physically bigger, sharper. He looks like he's in good form. Really hoping he can stay injury-free. Apparently he's made changes to his personal life, to his fitness plan, and like really trying to maintain his fitness. If we can have him fit all season, it does give us more danger and more options with Havertz. So I think the focus we're going to see is a winger. I think Nico Williams to Barcelona is still like not quite happening. Athletic have just given him the number 10 shirt, but maybe there's an opportunity to exploit there. We've been linked with Rafinha pretty consistently, and Barcelona need to sell him in order to bring in Nico Williams. So I think the winger is probably where we'll see someone come in. But this squad is looking just very rounded. And that Mikel Merino signing again firms up that left-hand side. If he plays as the number 8, that just makes that left-hand side more solid. I think he won more duels than, I think he was the player to win the second most duels in Europe last year. And Arteta loves winning duels, so it's like the perfect guy. So I think that left-hand side of the pitch, which often just looked a bit disconnected and was where Bayern knocked us out of the Champions League last year, right? That just looks a little bit more solid. So I think it's kind of baby steps, and every year under Arteta we have improved. If I saw this somewhere, if we get a points improvement again this year, it will be the first team to improve to get a higher points total 5 years in a row in Premier League history, which would be huge, like showing the progress that Arteta's got. Yeah, I think, but conversely, there is pressure on Arsenal now. I think there is an issue that we need to win more trophies. Like Arteta needs to start getting silverware. Like the cups need to be taken seriously. I'd like a League Cup would absolutely delight me. Like we need to take the cups more seriously. Get like Saka still hasn't won a trophy, right? He wasn't in the squad when we won the FA Cup. So I think it's vital that these players get that first cup win, that first trophy win, and then we can push on. But yeah, pressure this year. So we'll see how we respond. It usually goes without a problem, so we'll be fine.
Yeah, right? It certainly does. And I just want to get a quick answer to this as well. I've always felt striker is the issue potentially with Arsenal progressing. And I don't necessarily think this is the pinnacle point, but do you think like Arteta will push for a striker in this window if he manages to push on those players that he doesn't want in this squad?
If Nketiah goes, we have to get a striker. Like, if Nketiah goes, we need a striker. But I think we might see someone who can play multiple positions, because the trend with Arteta is you have to be able to play more than one position. Like, Kai Havertz is a striker who plays midfield, right? All of our defenders play right back, centre back, and left back. Like, all of them, every player has to be able to do another job. Rice can do box to box, can do the number 6. Like, all of it is about versatility. So I think if it is a striker, I don't think it will be someone like Gyökeres, who's just an out-and-out striker. I think it'll be someone who can perform multiple roles depending on the situation, because Arteta's trend throughout his tenure has been versatility. But I think if Nketiah goes, and hopefully Eddie, I wish you the best of luck, but I hope he goes, then I think we'll see someone come in there, because it would leave us properly short. And last thought for Arsenal, hopefully Ethan Nwaneri gets plenty of chances this year, and keep an eye out for Miles Lewis-Skelly, because he's a very, very exciting player. Hopefully we see a bit of them in the Cups this year.
Be fascinating. Right, Rory, let's move on to those clubs maybe outside of the top 2. I'm thinking about the likes of Liverpool, Man United, Newcastle. We spoke briefly about Aston Villa and Chelsea already. We've also got Spurs. Obviously, Spurs have pushed on in terms of their transfer business. They've got Dominic Solanke as well. I think the English tax has definitely hit them with that one in particular. When you look at the business that Bournemouth have managed to get in the last 24 hours, it appears to be the case anyway, as it currently stands. But yeah, if we start briefly, Liverpool, are we a bit like thinking this is a transition for Arne Slot and that kind of whole reorg of Richard Hughes in that director of football role? Because it feels like they haven't necessarily got the business that they wanted this summer.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one with Liverpool. I think people are expecting them to challenge for the title again, and I can't really see it myself, because there's a lot of change that's gone on here, but unfortunately not with the squad, right? I think last year they kind of mounted a title challenge until the defence started to creak, and until like the goals dried up and like things started to kind of just the wheels fell off a little bit. Like people have known for years, this is the third summer that Liverpool have tried to bring in that ball-winning midfielder, right? And everyone they've gone super public with, and the midfielders turned them down, and it's made them look stupid. And now they're kind of grasping around, and everybody knows they've got money and they're desperate, and that's like the worst position to be in the transfer window, right? So I think there's all that going on, and then you've got a new manager in Arne Slot who nobody really knows what's going to happen there. Obviously, incredible job at Feyenoord. He's massively supported by Klopp. The fans are really open to him coming in. You know he's going to get the back in, right, for at least the first 3 games. If things don't go well, then what happens there? I think there's a lot of change around that club, and people need to just think, for me, if they can get into the top 4, that is a very good season. And what business they get done over the rest of the summer is going to be fascinating, because, as I said, they are not in a strong position for negotiating now. I think they really, it was strange how they made that Zubimendi deal so public, because I think Arsenal went for him, but it was mentioned like Arsenal have shown an interest, as have Real Madrid and Chelsea probably, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Liverpool went so public with it. It's just, it doesn't scream a good start for Richard Hughes, right?
It doesn't, no. And I feel sorry for Richard Hughes, because I think going into that kind of atmosphere at the beginning of this season, there's an expectation that he's going to pull something out of the bag. And it's not that straightforward. Unfortunately, when you're director of football, you've got to get your feet under the table, but also at the same time, try and use your connections to kind of try and get that maybe highlight the player that's going to maybe change the ethos. And I know Arne Slot has identified that number 6 role as the kind of key pinnacle for this season. So as you allude to, I'm surprised at how public they went about the business. It's inevitable that it feels like they are going to be delaying that now till maybe January or next summer. But also for me, Rory, there's a lot of contracts that are due to expire soon. So the likes of Virgil van Dijk, Mo Salah, for example. And then on top of that, you've got these rumours of these younger players that did well, relatively well, at least under Klopp last season, that are being touted for moves, likes of Bobby Clark being linked with Leipzig, for example. And it just doesn't feel like they've got a settled rhythm right now. It feels like they're going to have to persevere. And as you allude to, I think top 4, if they manage to achieve it, would be amazing, given it's a new transition, new style of football. And we expect Arne Slot to actually introduce something different to Jurgen Klopp. Maybe keep some of the ethics, but certainly he's got his own style, right? And I think it'll be very fascinating to see that. Let's kind of quickly transition to Man United, because I think this is the funniest story out of all of it. We've got Erik ten Hag, where we still don't understand his style of tactics. We don't know what he's going to bring with this season. He's managed to bring in some players. I do feel that they don't necessarily enhance a squad necessarily. It feels like he's gone with trusted players that he knows from his Ajax days, the likes of Mazouari and De Ligt. And that's going to be fascinating. But the one thing that I will take from this, Rory, is I was listening into a kind of watch along / listen or around Premier League clubs and their fan bases. And Man United fan came on and he said, look, we've kind of fixed the problems up front with Joshua Zirkzee. We've fixed the issues potentially at the back. But in the middle of the park, it is still a question mark. There's question marks over Mason Mount, how he's going to perform, and where does he actually fit into that system. Bruno Fernandes is confirmed for another few seasons with a new contract. But yeah, the likes of Casemiro are still there. They're still taking a wage. They're trying their best to get rid of McTominay, but he's probably the one guy that you actually feel that when he comes on, he tries to at least change it and puts a bit of an effort in. So I do struggle with that kind of approach, should we say. And I feel like I alluded to earlier that between him and Maresca, they're likely candidates if they don't get to a good start. And I was looking at their kind of schedule in the first 5 games, 3 of them are away, plus a home game against Liverpool. Now, if, for argument's sake, they don't get to the best of starts, it's not going to look too pretty on Ten Hag. And then, Ineos with their kind of rebrand of Man United, they said they were going to be sustainable. They're going to make sure that they're making astute signings. But yet they've kind of spent a lot of money on men that Ten Hag wants. So it feels like they're backing him, but to what end?
I think it's like the Ten Hag sign a player that doesn't have an Ajax connection challenge continues. Like, it's insane how he just continues for Dutch or players that have played for Ajax. It's an interesting one with Ineos, isn't it? I think they've also brought in managers around him. So they brought in Ruud van Nistelrooy, and they brought in the guy who was managing, I want to say in Sweden, but I've probably got that wrong. He was managing in Scandinavia somewhere. He was a manager.
Yeah.
And they brought them in as coaches to work alongside him, which isn't a vote of trust, I don't think. And will open to rumours almost now that before the season has started, if Ten Hag doesn't start well, are they just going to give it Ruud van Nistelrooy, right? Because that kind of feels like what's going to happen. So Ten Hag will continue on defiantly. I think the signings are exciting, right? I think Zirkzee is a very exciting player, but he had 1.5 good seasons at Bologna, maybe 2 good seasons. Like, it'll be interesting to see if that can continue. Obviously, he's up against Højlund as well in terms of like starting position, unless they play him out on the wing. Like, what role is Zirkzee actually going to play? That'll be interesting. Is he going to be the main guy? The one for me is Matthijs de Ligt, I think
Yes. Yeah.
if you ask Juve fans what they think of him, or you ask Bayern fans what they think of him,
Yeah.
none of them were particularly upset when he left. And I
No.
think they're signing him on the potential of him in that Ajax team. Like,
Yes.
the player that people thought he was going to be. And I think from that Ajax team, the only player that's really lived up and been fantastic is De Jong, really. The one that's been like, okay, he's lived up to the promise that we saw. All the rest of them just haven't really hit it. Like Ziyech, not really. He's playing out in Turkey now, right? Like the one, Van der Beek, right?
Yeah.
Man United basically killed his career, right? I think like a lot of those players haven't reached those levels. And I think de Ligt is being signed on the potential of 5 years ago. I don't think he's as steady as people think. And don't forget, and this is going to sound harsh, but Eric Dyer pushed him out of the team at Bayern, right?
Yeah.
Like Thomas Tuchel started picking Eric Dyer ahead of him. And now Eric Dyer is many things, but what he isn't is good on the ball. And I think like and from the preseason, it looks like Man United are going to start playing, like really insist on playing out from the back. And, like this is our brand of football now. I worry about actually how good Matthijs de Ligt is going to be. Mazraoui, I think it didn't actually a solid player, but again, Bayern fans weren't really upset when he left. And I think he was almost kind of backup or kind of spare player there. So I think, again, this could be the kick-on for him, but he's 26 years old. De Ligt is 25. Like, they should be at their peak at this point, like, or hitting their peak. So I think, and then there's the issue that when all their centre-backs are fit, they have a lot of centre-backs. Like, Lenny Yoro, the biggest signing, right? Obviously, really unlucky with the injury that he's sustained. But you're going to have him, you're going to have Maguire, you're going to have Lindelof, you're going to, like, there's a lot of centre-backs there that you're going to have to try and cram into this team and keep happy. And I think it's still a bit of a mess at Manchester United. And as you said, the midfield just doesn't fill me with confidence at all. Sancho is clearly still despised by Ten Hag, and he's still there. So I think there's a lot of issues in that squad. But I think they will do better than they did last year. I think I will give them that. They won't finish 8th, but I don't have them in the top 4 either.
No.
But I think we will be seeing Ruud van Nistelrooy doing press conferences before long.
Yes, I can see that in an interim position potentially in the near future. Definitely, it does feel like that's inevitable. Let's quickly go into Spurs. Spurs has been fascinating in terms of the business that they've managed to achieve this summer. It feels like Ange has kind of alluded to the fact that last season was all about trying to instill that style of football. Now this season is all about pressing on. By getting Dominic Solanke, that takes the pressure off Son. Archie Gray looks like inevitably going to be a very interesting player. Lucas Bergvall as well, interesting kid. Let's see how he performs. And then obviously he's adapted quite well. But also Spurs have got a lot of youngsters that the likes of Ben, when he eventually does join us for a pod, I'm sure will allude to the fact that, they look promising. They look promising going forward, and they've got a very bright future. Do you think, however, though, there are going to be a lot of stigmas around the old age issue of centre-backs maybe going walkies, Vicario, and maybe not being as strong on corners, for example? Do you think those elements might affect their season?
I think, again, Spurs will push on. I think Spurs have made, Solanke is going to be a great signing. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Archie Gray's an interesting one because he's only 18 years old. Are you going to throw him in as a regular? I don't know. Basuma has just been suspended for the first game for bloody laughing gas. That guy needs to be shipped out of the club at some point. There's still that midfield. Obviously, Højbjerg going. Is there a natural replacement for Højbjerg? I know, again, he's not the most flamboyant or glamorous player, but when you're 1-0 up and you need to see the game out, he does a job, right? Have you got the replacement there? Bergvall looks really exciting, genuinely like a wonder kid level kind of the buy from Spurs there, which is kind of annoying. So I think there's the young players coming, but I do think they will push on. But I think the issue with Spurs is always going to be, as long as they continue to play such kamikaze football, the issue is going to remain there. You'll win games, but you're going to win them 4-3, but you'll lose the odd one 6-1, right? And I think it's just, he's not going to change. Spurs aren't going to change. I just think they'll get top 4 this year. But their fans will have a lot of fun as it happens. And I think that's kind of that's half the battle, right? You enjoying watching the
Definitely.
football your team play, then yeah, cool, knock yourselves out. And I think Spurs will get top 4, but they'll have fun doing it.
And before we kind of allude to the middle of the table kind of mix, Newcastle, obviously they're coming off the back of last season, the likes of Sandro Tonali being back in that squad. Hopefully he's going to have a bit more of a consistent run this time around. I'm not too sure about the business that Newcastle have done this summer, if that's necessarily going to push them on. Likes of Lloyd Kelly, for example. I don't know if it's necessarily an upgrade on what they have, to be brutally honest. But yeah, do you think there's at least foundations to have them in the top 6?
Yeah, I think they've just not improved, have they? They're just not improved.
Not necessarily, no.
And I know they're trying, like, the fans will be screaming at us going, yeah, because of the bloody red cartel or whatever they called us, right? But, like, there are PSR rules that they need to follow, right? They've spent most of their summer trying to convince people not to buy Isak, right? I do think we'll see them kind of busier towards the end of the transfer window.
Yeah.
But I think as it stands at the moment, having Tonali back is great, but I haven't seen much improvement in the squad, and they've just failed to sell Almiron for the second year in a row. So that's more money that's not coming into the squad. I think they're just having a bit of an issue shifting the players. It's weird that the one player they did sell was Minte to Brighton, who's one of the most exciting young players, arguably, in world football. And they sold him, obviously, because, again, Newcastle fans are screaming because of the bloody red cartel, right?
Of course,
because of the PSR rules. But that, for me, is an odd one, selling him. But while Almiron remains on the books. So, yeah, just not much improvement for Newcastle. Maybe Conference League, Europa League, if they have a good run. What's interesting is, can Eddie Howe continue to get the most out of this squad? Because they started the season last season quite badly. It looked like he was going to get sacked, but he managed to turn it around. Can he keep that going and keep the feel-good factor going? I think they'll finish roughly where they did last year, but maybe get Europe.
Anyway, middle of the table. Some interesting sides that are trying to progress themselves into that top 10 mix. West Ham's business has been interesting, to say the least. I don't know necessarily if those personnel that have bought in will necessarily push them on, because I think if they have a few bad results, the crowd will get back on their backs and turn it on them. Crystal Palace, obviously under Glasner, I think they've been very astute. Damachi Kamada, for example, has been a great signing. It wouldn't surprise me, Rory, if they bring in Filip Kostic from Juventus to kind of bring the old gang back together. But for me, Rory, I'm actually interested to see how Fulham perform, because they bought Emil Smith-Rowe off you, so the Croydon Pele, as they called him.
I've only just stopped crying and got over that one, I'll be honest. It took me a while. It took me a while.
I can imagine. I think the only question mark is, can they get the replacement for Paulinho and maybe a striker in this window? Because, Tim Ream, we unfortunately bid farewell to him. His association with Fulham ended. He went back to Charlotte FC. Bobby De Riva-Reader has actually transferred to Leicester City. So that's fascinating to see that transition of that Fulham squad. But I think attacking-wise, they're very exciting. It's just that stability, as I allude to, and maybe a striker. And that's the thing that I think they're going to be a very goal frenzy team. Like, they've obviously kick off against Man United first day of the season, which I'm anticipating them to be like a 3-3 result. I think it's going to be one of those kind of games where neither side are going to shut up shop. However, I've got a lot of high hopes for Fulham. I don't know, it's probably like blind faith here, Rory, but I genuinely think they've got a good manager, a team that sort of buys into what Marco Silva's trying to build at that club anyway. And when you look at the clubs that they're paired against, I think they can give them a game. But like I say, they're probably going to ship a load of goals at the same time. And then we just have to include them in the conversation. Brighton as well. Interesting manager. Not a lot of people know about him, apart from he was at St. Pauli. He's a young manager, and he's probably going to surprise us all by doing a De Zerbi-esque performance. But he's also shipped off the likes of Pascal Gross, which was fascinating to see. However, they have invested, Mente as being one of them. They've also activated the clause for the lead striker, Ruta, as well. So that would be fascinating to see how that pans out as a move, if it does go over the line anyway. But in terms of that kind of middle of the park, who's the team that you fancy pushing on this season?
I'm going to go with West Ham. I feel like Crystal Palace haven't taken enough of advantage this summer. I think they've made some good signings, but they need more. I think Ismail Assar could be a very clever signing from Marseille, right? Obviously did very well at Watford. Kamada had a disastrous year at Lazio, but hopefully
Yes,
he can come in and do a job at Palace.
true.
I just feel like their fans at the moment are like, okay, but what else? Like they just need a little bit like
Yeah,
with Elise going, where's the attacking spark there? Are you relying purely on Ismail Assar? There was rumours about Zaha coming back, right? Like what's the next step? But it'll be interesting to see where Glasner takes this. Obviously, they had such a fantastic end to the season. It'll be interesting to see if he can continue the momentum. For Fulham, I think you nailed it with the striker. I think Muniz obviously had a bit of a purple patch, but I don't know if you can bank on him to do that consistently over a season. Next season, again, very exciting young striker. Hopefully, he can continue. I will be backing them to the hilt because they've got Emil Smith Rowe now, and I hope they win every game apart from 2 next year. And I'll be delighted if he scores against Manchester United this weekend. But I think West Ham have actually done very good business. I think Kilman and
that is
Todibo
very
at
clever.
centre back is just incredible. Like that is 2 very good centre backs. Right, Kilman has been one of the most solid centre backs in the Premier League. Like for Wolves, he was fantastic, really good on the ball. Todibo, bloody like everybody was after him. Right, Juventus were after him. West Ham have come in, be like, no, we'll take him. So they've got 2 solid centre backs there. Right, see if they can get a partnership going. Exciting times. You've got Wan-Bissaka, who I think is 1 versus 1, like 1v1, one of the best defenders in the league. Obviously gets caught out of position at times, attacking wise, can do more. But I think for a team like West Ham, he comes in, solid addition, absolutely flawless. Full Krug, I cannot wait to see in the Premier League. It's either going to be like he'll have a Michu season of 25 goals or he'll get 3 goals all season. It's going to be complete, like, blinding success or disaster. No middle ground. I'm excited to see which one. And for them to go out and sign the Championship Player of the Season last year in Crescencio Somerville, I think him on one wing, Bowen on the other, full Krug up top, that's pretty exciting. With the midfield of like Kudus, you've got Paquetá, who's not going anywhere, and it looks like he's going to be playing this season because the hearing isn't going to be until next summer. You've got like, and Souček always there, solid midfield. You've shored up that defense. Like, I still think goalkeeper's a bit of an issue, but if Lopetegui can get a positive start and can bring in a bit more maybe front-footed football, even though he's not the most exciting manager, just a bit more front-footed football, a bit more possession-based. I think West Ham really could push this year, and I think they're going to be. I think they're going to get into the European places. I think they've just done really clever business, honestly.
I have to say, if you're David Moyes, you'd be disappointed that the board have decided to invest in players that I reckon he probably would have been happy to have had in his squad. But as you allude to, it's going to be fascinating to see how that pans out. Let's kind of allude a little bit more to the teams that have just come up as well, because I think this is going to be interesting. Out of all of the teams, Rory, that have come up, who do you expect to kind of maybe break through and maybe stay up in this league?
I think Leicester will have enough to stay up. I think their squad was a Premier League squad in the Championship. Them going down was just a complete freak. I'm still not sure how they got relegated, right? So I think that squad is more than good enough to stay up. Steve Cooper is more than a good enough manager to keep them up. I think Leicester will be relatively safe, 13th, 14th, fine. The one for me that's really interesting, well, the 2 for me that are really interesting are Ipswich and Southampton, right? They've both got exciting young coaches who both play very particular styles of football. McKenna really likes that dynamic attacking football. Russell Martin is a very idiosyncratic manager. Every player has specific roles, very precise. And it's about the same thing I say every year is like, don't do a Norwich, but now I'm going to update it to don't do a Burnley, right? And like you have to adapt that football,
sure,
and be used to and get used to not being the protagonist in the league anymore, right? Because it's such a big, and the fans suffer it the most, really. I think such a big attitude shift to go from winning every week to like fucking losing every week, right? And every win you get is massive. So I think if the managers are able to deal with that shift in attitude, deal with the shift in tactics to make it a tiny bit more pragmatic, a bit more defensively solid, maybe a bit more defensively minded, then I think that is where the interest is. Because with Steve Cooper, he's been there, he's done that, he knows the Premier League, he knows his football isn't as gung-ho as McKenna and as Russell Martin at times. So I think those two teams are the ones that I find most interesting. The romantic in me wants to say that Ipswich are going to stay up and they're going to, like, do a Blackpool but continue through to the second half of the season. But in my head, Southampton go down because Southampton always go down. I think, unfortunately, Russell Martin might be the first one to get sacked this season. Even though he's a very good coach, I feel like Southampton might panic, and I feel like they might just go, get rid of him, and they'll massively regret it. So I think those are the two teams that are really interesting. But my short answer is going to be, I think Ipswich stay up and Southampton go down. How do you see it?
I see it as, out of all three, Ipswich should stay up because I think they'll be very astute in the marketplace. I mean, we're talking about Calvin Phillips at the beginning of the show, but if we allude to the other signings that they brought in, or at least kept on, Amari Hutchinson being one of them, Jacob Reeves, who I think had a phenomenal season with Hull City. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how he adapts. But, you've got staples like Leif Davis, who I would say keep an eye on him. Very interesting fullback. And I think, those kind of players, built into that kind of philosophy that has been built from those kind of League One days, they've got a solid team that I think will surprise a lot of teams when they turn up at Portman Road. I think the key is how many points do they take at home as opposed to on the road. They're going to need to make Portman Road as a fortress. And yes, there's going to be games where, a bit like Luton, they may get, trodden on and, there might be those 5-0 defeats along the way. But they're going to have to rebound and think about how they approach those games at home and how can they make it as memorable as possible for that group of players. Because I think they've got a philosophy of, if we don't do well, at least this group of players can bring us back up. And I think that's probably the philosophy that they brought in with it. Leicester City, I'm fearful of personally. I think they will struggle personally. They haven't had a great preseason. I'm not too sure about the business, whether they're going to bring in any more bodies. But I'm with you in terms of Southampton. I think Russell Martin has already alluded to the fact that he's not concerned about the business yet, but they are still looking at getting a few bodies through the door. They are lightweight in my eyes in the middle of the park. They obviously did very well last season to go up. But, I don't know necessarily if Ben Brereton Diaz is the answer in terms of bringing the goals for them. Adam Armstrong is another one that did so well for them last season. It'll be interesting to see if he can build on the success from last season. And, Alcaraz, should I say, even, that was brought in back from his loan spell at Juventus. It'd be interesting to see what kind of season he has in the Premier League this time around as well. But Russell Martin, I think, is a man that they're going to build a future again if they don't go or stay up, should I say. I think they're looking to build that squad so that it can be sustainable to come back up again. So it'd be fascinating. But for me, I think Ipswich are the team to potentially stay up out of the three, personally, Rory. But that leaves us with approximately about 4 teams that we haven't spoken about. Forest, Brentford, Bournemouth, Wolves. How do we feel these clubs are going to do? Because Bournemouth, I was a bit fearful when they sold Solanke. I was like, looking at the goal contributions, Solanke was 19 goals last season, 2 of them from the penalty spot. So it shows you how much he scored from open play. And behind him was the Semenyo, who was on 8, for example. And they'd only scored 57 goals. So if you take away those 19 goals from Solanke, that's a bit of a gap to kind of fill in.
That's a lot.
But it looks like Ivan Nelson's coming in. Fantastic bit of business with Dean Huijsen, who we know from his days at Juventus and Roma last season. That makes them potentially, for me, a team that's likely to push on this season. I don't know about you, but it feels like that. Where I'm a bit more fearful is the likes of Wolves and Brentford. I'd say possibly more Wolves than Brentford, purely because I've got a soft touch for Brentford these days, Rory. But I think the only obstacle for them is the debacle with Ivan Toney. Is he still going to be there? And, I don't think he helps the team morale generally. I get that sense. The perception is that yes, there was this kind of hierarchy that he'll come in and score the goals, but he didn't last season. He didn't really
No.
help their cause. And I think that's what's disappointing. And I think if they can ship him off and bring in someone like an Nketiah, I think they would probably strive and push on. Whereas with Tony, it feels like there's something lingering in the background. And with Wolves, quickly, Rory, they've sold Neto to Chelsea. It feels inevitable that they'll sign like 10 Portuguese players before the window ends. But if they don't, I'm not too sure if this squad can sustain it. And they've got a really tight fixture list. So going into, I think it's around November is when they start having easier games. So, you know, for the first few games, they've got some big teams. So yeah, out of those four, I mean, who do you think is likely to kind of sustain a run into that mid-table mix?
I think Wolves. I think I'm not gonna doubt them again. We called them to go down last year, and Gary O'Neill kept them up with more than enough points, and they really had a very impressive season. I think they've still got enough attacking quality beyond Neto, because what you have to remember with Neto is he actually doesn't play that much. Wolves did very well without him in the team most of the year. Obviously, when he came into the team, he was very good, scored great goals, but they've still got like Hwang. They've still got, his name's just escaped me, but the Brazilian striker. They've still got a lot of really good attacking talent in that team. I don't fear for Wolves. The team I fear for is Forest. I think they just, like, if it wasn't for the three teams being so bad last season, they would have gone down. If it wasn't for Burnley and Sheffield United, my God, all those teams were terrible, weren't they? But if it wasn't for that, Forest would have gone down. I think this year they're not going to have the luxury of a Burnley. I think, sorry. So I think Forest are the one for me. Obviously, as you said, Nuno Espirito Santo came in, didn't really improve anything, didn't really get anything revitalized. From what I've seen, the business they've done has been underwhelming at best. I'm just getting their transfers up now so I can remind myself, but Elliot Anderson from Newcastle, that feels like a PSR workaround for 41 million euros. Sorry, I'm in euros. Milenkovic from Fiorentina is an interesting one because he's a very solid centre-back. I said about the West Ham were linked with a few years ago, and an exciting player. But I don't think they've brought in obviously they've brought in another goalkeeper, because why not? But I don't think they've added that quality, and they were circling the drain so hard last year. So I fear for Forest, but Wolves I think will be okay. Bournemouth will be more than okay. Brentford I think are in danger. With the Ivan Toney thing, as you said, nobody's really happy with him. They had a really bad year last year. It was really bad, especially how they ended the season. So I think maybe Thomas Frank, after a couple of years, the same voice, it kind of wears off a little bit and people lose focus, and players like Wissa are still waiting for their move. And I feel like there just needs a bit of a fresh energy in there. So I think for Brentford, it could be a difficult, long year. So I think Brentford and Forest are the ones I fear for getting dragged in there.
And Rory, I did miscalculate. There is one team that we have failed to mention, and that is Everton. How could we forget them because of the amount of memes that we've been sharing amongst ourselves on WhatsApp? But Everton, they've done some decent business. I know a lot of people frown upon what they've managed to achieve, but I think they've done some decent business. What do you think of Everton's chances? Obviously, last season at Goodison Park as well. So there's going to be a bit of nostalgia this year with the Evertonians. But yeah, there's still that lingering thought of there's going to be a points deduction at some point this season, it feels, inevitably. I think they've got enough to stay up, though. And I think they could even better the position that they've achieved last season. Do you feel that same sentiment?
Yeah, I think they're going to push on. Dyche has done an incredible job there. Without the points deduction last year, they finished comfortably, but they still avoided relegation comfortably last year. So with the points deduction, then it's even better. Ilman Ndiaye coming in, I think Chef U fans must be fuming that he sodded off to Marseille and then came back immediately a year later to the Premier League. But I think he's a very exciting player. It would be great to see him. Lindstrom, we might actually see him on the pitch, which would be nice. But the one for me that caught my eye is, of course, Jake O'Brien, young Irish centre-back brought in from Lyon. Excited to see him come into the Premier League, what he can do. He had a very good season in Lyon. Leon had a difficult season, but they turned it around in the end. He had a very good season, so it'll be exciting to see how he does. I think Everton will be fine. And more importantly, they've got Mopai out of the club, so that can only be a good thing, right? So I think, oh no, he's back. He's back from
He's still
Brentford.
back.
He's in the club now, isn't he? So he's come back. Well, maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know. We'll have to see how that works out. But I think Everton should have more than enough. They could have quite an exciting season. Hopefully, they manage to send off Goodison Park with some cheering and not the stereotypical booing. But we will see. We
shall see. Well, on that note, we're going to go for a quick break. And on the other side, you'll be hearing our quick fire predictions.
We are back, and it is time for, that sounded a bit partridge, didn't it? But we are back, and it's time for our Premier League predictions. Very quick fire. So, Adam, without further ado, let's go for it. Who do you predict to win the league this year?
Arsenal.
Oh, snap. I said Arsenal. Now, I said Arsenal last year as well. Also this year, 1 year, eventually, I have to be right. And that's why I bet on it every year. I have to get it right eventually. So we agree with the winner, Arsenal.
Yeah.
The pressure terrifies me. Adam, who do you have for the top four?
So in second place, Man City, third, Liverpool, and fourth spot, Spurs.
I promise listeners, we haven't planned this beforehand. But
no, we haven't shared
my top four are Man City, Liverpool, and Spurs. This is going to be quick. Let's go on to Europe. Who do you have qualifying for Europe? I've gone for another 3 teams because I don't think we'll have the 8 teams that qualified this year. So I've just picked 3, but who have you gone for?
I've gone for 2 teams because I'm not too sure, obviously, how that's going to pan out. But the 2 certainties for me are Villa and Newcastle. And if I was to pick a team outside of that mix, I'm going to go for West Ham.
I just realised I forgot about the existence of Aston Villa, but I've gone for my European teams. I've gone for Manchester United, West Ham, and Brighton. I apologise, Villa fans. I would have put you in there somewhere, but that's life is life. We live and die by our decisions. Adam, your teams to get relegated.
Leicester City, Southampton, and Nottingham Forest.
I have gone for Nottingham Forest, Brentford, and Southampton. Got Ipswich and Leicester staying up. I've got Ipswich and Leicester staying up. Okay, this is always the quickest award since he's joined the league, but Golden Boot? Haaland, yeah, of course, easy, nice. Now, the player of the year, I've worked on the basis that Arsenal have won the league at this point. But who is your player of the year?
Martin Odegaard.
I've gone for Martin Odegaard as well. So we've both got Martin Odegaard for player of the year based on the fact that Arsenal are obviously definitely going to win the league. Young player of the year, I think I've gone a bit left field, but who have you gone for young player of the year?
I've gone for Harvey Elliott. But I'm going to just call out this youngster. I don't think he'll get as much game time, but if he does under Oliver Glasner, keep an eye on Jezrin Raki even. He is a player that was on loan at Charlton Athletic. He's been doing quite well in pre-season. I'm expecting him to maybe fill the void of Michael Olise. But for me, I think Harvey Elliott, because of his age, I know he's technically not maybe a young player these days by our standards anyway, but he's technically 19, so he deserves to be a young player of this year.
Nice. I've gone for Kobbie Mainoo. I think Manchester United are going to have a better season. I think the fact he plays for Man United will give him a bit more of a boost, and I think if he does well, he will be a main reason why they do well.
Good shout.
Kobbie Mainoo for young player of the year. Also, because I didn't just want to put Saka, obviously. And who have you gone for your surprise package?
I've gone for Ipswich Town. I genuinely feel they will push on and maybe surprise some people, especially with the manager at the helm. So let's see. What about you?
I'm still deciding as we speak. I think I'm going to go. I think I'm going to go for Brighton, which is a weird one, but I'm going to say why. I think loads of people are expecting Palace to do really well this year. I don't think they'll do as well as people think they will. And I think Brighton have timed their spending, their splurge really, really well, because every other team is unable to spend, and Brighton have gone bang, 200 million. And I think we could see them really rock it up, even though I don't think I did put them in the European places. That's fine. So I'm going to say Brighton as a surprise package this year.
Good stuff. Well, Rory, that leaves us with filling in the listener with the fixtures that are going to take place this weekend. So let's start off with, most people are listening to us hopefully on the Friday. So what is the fixtures this weekend, Rory?
Well, we are starting off the season with an absolute blockbuster as Manchester United host Fulham. Obviously, last year Fulham won there, the first victory there for about 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see if they can follow that one up. Under the Friday night lights, what a way to kick off the season. Then the early kickoff on Saturday is Ipswich Town hosting Liverpool. Again, another interesting one. We've talked about Liverpool's potential issues. Ipswich with a statement to make. Can they get an incredible start to the season? Then the start of the 3 o'clock kickoffs, we have the champions-elect Arsenal. I'm going to lean into this, guys. Arsenal hosting Wolves. We have Everton taking on Brighton. Newcastle hosting Southampton in the Battle of the Stripes. Nottingham Forest taking on Bournemouth, in 2 teams that we've kind of predicted to struggle, kind of. And in the late kickoff, we have Battle of the Clarets as West Ham take on Aston Villa. That is going to be a really exciting game for me. I think there's going to be lots of goals in that one. On Sunday, we have Brentford taking on Crystal Palace. Then kind of the headline game of the weekend, I suppose, as the ever-entertaining Chelsea. We will see which of the 48 players make it onto the pitch as Chelsea host Manchester City. And then on Monday night, we have Leicester hosting Spurs. Again, that could be an interesting game. I feel like Spurs could win that fairly convincingly. But what a weekend for Premier League football. It's back, guys. It's back. It feels like it never left. The football never ends, but we are here to cover it all. So thank you for joining us. Adam, anything to say before I send these people off on their way?
Yes, we will have a Serie A preview and prediction. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time, but please keep your eyes peeled on the socials. We will inevitably get that recorded and you will hear some predictions for Serie A. So as you'll know, the format has changed. We will be just doing separate episodes now for the Premier League and Serie A. So keep an eye on that on your favorite platform of choice. In the meantime, if you could give us a review as well, that'd be really appreciated. Obviously, whether that be on YouTube or whether that be on your favorite platform of choice, make sure you give us any comments as well so we can learn and develop this podcast. But Rory, it was great to be back and talking about football again.
I've missed it, even though it's only been about 2 weeks since we did the last one. But guys, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to be in your company as always. You can find us on Twitter at Italian Anglo Pod, on Instagram and TikTok at Anglo-Italian Pod. And yeah, like and subscribe, all those things. We will see you next time. Ciao, arrivederci.
Ciao, ciao.